Hi. So last week I dropped this video, which is just another 5 minutes of me gushing about the MP7 to add to the massive pile of videos which can't help but mention and plug it. Not only has no one called me out on this religious adherence to the gun, but it did well enough to warrant another. After all, I did promise you guys a review of one of your loadouts, and I really need to have a stable series which isn't just gun guide. This format isn't supportable. So without further ado, here I am with the second installation and first fan-centered episode. I'm Six Snipes, and this is Snipes Does Loadouts. Scrolling through your comments, I saw a lot of great suggestions.
Alpha AK gun guide when Honey Badger and AS just run AK first.
But with the intense competition, I decided to roll with this rather interesting one. The premise is ultimate visual suppression, and the direct result is something I call respiratory failure. That's right, user Mellow Yellow with a build I personally thought was just too interesting to not use, basically turning you into what he says is an individual smoke artillery. Here's the premise. Full attacking support set up for riflemen, observers, or commanders. M16 2x red dot, smoke launcher, flash hider, extended magazine, and a heavy carrier. Throw on 3 smoke grenades and you're good to go. I didn't see any specific usage of a sidearm, much less a gas mask, which I sort of assume you'd want, so I threw those on in some domination. This is supposed to be a killer and push, and I fully believe it. Much of the mode is an effective meat grinder where the defending team just holds angles all day and plucks off individual attackers until the commander gets wise enough to call in some artillery or something. Rinse and repeat. You guys wonder why I don't play this. The gist here is that you don't need your commander to do all that for you. You've got it yourself, with more than enough smoke to cover an entire battlefield and leave the enemy in a state of visual disarray. That's all well and good, and while having fielded this loadout for a couple of hours and getting a feel for it, I have several critiques. Firstly, this is expensive and heavy. Not much room for niceties such as higher level rifle, decent handgun, and so on. The other drawback is how much ordnance you're carrying. The heavy carrier isn't bad, but the 3 smoke shells as well as 3 grenades make weight the noticeably deciding factor in how fast you can cross the street and ultimately live, smoke or not. Simply put, if you can't move fast, you'll die faster. You want to be a smoke battery, you might as well just carry the mortar around with you. Second, the fact that this entire loadout is built around smoke is somewhat disconcerting given smoke's nature in Insurgency and real life. It's not as if it's the most reliable and predictable element here. Yes, when it works, and it's quite good at visual obstruction, but half the time either you don't place it right or it just decides to not cover as much as you'd think, and half the enemy up the road can still see you. This leads to grenade spam, even dumping all your smokes in one go to hold a continuous blockage on lines of sight to counter snipers from one or more angles. Despite having all these smokes, you lose them pretty quick. Of course, while you're on the objective, you won't need any of this, so dump it while you can, push, and refill at a crate. And I have to admit, even from the get-go, this loadout seemed at the very least worthwhile, if nothing else than just for the complete meme it is to spam a metric ton of gaseous cancer onto the battlefield and just making it harder for everyone to play in general. All this while the M16 ended up being my crutch, and often I found myself focusing on playing defensively instead of pushing with smokes and just fragging out with this. The smoke made for an interesting strategy where polluting key points on several objectives made it so that the enemy was either forced to equip a gas mask or suffer through the plumes and give themselves away coughing. Iffy at best, but a novel strategy nonetheless. The P226, or the L10 as I think it's called in this game, was a handy secondary to have. I never get caught without a pistol, and the high capacity and outstanding performance was life-saving as always. As for actual visual cover, put it this way, you can walk down the main street of Precinct with no issue, and that's huge. Enemy players were prone to blind fire, however the area of effect is so wide that I seldom found myself taking damage here. Of the 2 variants, I much prefer the shootable grenades as their ease of use, superior range, and overall faster deployment and waiting time for effect is far lower than that of the handhelds, but I had no issue with the canisters as long as I had time to spare. The 2x red dot was a little obnoxious at first and not quite at the level of something like an ACOG to let me really focus on ranged kills, but that's not exactly an issue when you can't see past 2 feet. If anything, you may need a lower magnification, even the iron sights. The flash hider does a good job at concealing your muzzle flare, just be sure to not equip tracers to fully conceal your fire behind walls of smoke. I would personally trim some fat by dropping the extended magazine. It's an equipment credit which would go to something else like picking up an AUG or a G36 instead, as it only gives you an extra 5 bullets and in my eyes just isn't worth it. You'll lose some of that weight too. More extensive edits would be to simply drop the heavy carrier entirely. It's only losing 2 smoke grenades, still leaving you with a nowhere near insignificant 4. And it won't slow you down so much, as well as clipping through surfaces and getting you killed when you otherwise shouldn't be. Being a bigger model makes you far more prone to this. Ultimately, I have to note how much fun this loadout was. There's no reason to not give it a whirl, and it's perfect to deny the stupid campers in the back of the map during a domination game, or even just harass your own team before they can spawn. In a competitive sense, I can't recommend this, however. The idea that you can just become a one-man smokescreen is novel, but relying on this is both foolhardy and a liability. If you die, your team is back to square one, and it's not like the commander can't just call on his own artillery anyway. It's also not like anyone else on your team isn't using smokes. It's a very common accessory and the widely recognized counter to crossfires and enemy gunners or snipers. Believe me, your guys are using this. It'd be much better if everyone just brings one smoke grenade and you all use them together rather than being a sloth and a somewhat less effective artillery battery. Sure, the shells may come slower, but the reload speed of your 30mm is abhorrent, and swapping between every single grenade to throw each and every one takes far longer than just letting the rain come down. The difference won't win you that many games. And remember, push is about regrouping and pushing the next objective faster than the retreating enemy force can retaliate. That won't happen when you can shoot the smoke but are still waddling up a mountain 100 yards back. In conclusion, this build works to an extent, but you're not a miracle worker and you're not indisposable. Your equipment is probably better spent on less smoke and more bang, but that's just my take. And if you want to see another one, then leave some comments down there about your build. If I see something new and interesting, I'll be sure to pick it up and try it next episode. I'm Six Snipes, and I do Loadouts. Thanks for watching.